During the post-war period, people were looking for new contemporary ideas about architecture, about modern living.
Nestled against the great Rocky Mountain range lies the city of Denver.
There were a number of architects experimenting with different forms and extraordinary looking buildings.
The technology of space travel, a great deal of it came out of Colorado. It was a relatively blank slate.
Would you call yourself a sculptor or an architect, basically?
Well, I'm primarily an architect.
Charles Deaton was a visionary who saw the world from an optimistic standpoint.
His approach was very unconventional.
Charles Deaton is a visionary architect, artist, inventor, designer, and a wonderful father.
This program was made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with additional funding provided in memory of Deanna E. LaCamera, by Hassel and Marianne Ledbetter, and by members like you. Thank you. With special thanks to the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, and to these organizations.
I think one of the things about Denver that made it a hub for modernism was there was room to grow.
Denver faces forward to lead the growth and excitement that is the modern West today.
They saw this as an opportunity for an expression of something new, of something different, of something distinctive. It was a center for space-age development. The construction of Martin Marietta down outside of Littleton. It became a place where people were building rockets.
During that period, a lot of architects ignored Colorado, Denver in particular, as a cow town. There were others who really saw a potential here for a new kind of modernism. People like I.M. Pei and Charles Deaton, of course.
I think we've always been open to new ideas and new people. We've grown over the years by people choosing to live here for the quality of life and the opportunities that Denver presents. And we're an open book, I think, in many ways.
Charles believed in spaces that cradle you.
He really enjoyed nature. There was constantly this dialogue about the formations of the mountains and everything, you know. That was very much part of him.
What really makes Charles Deaton unique in terms of his design is that these buildings were designed originally as sculptural forms. You look at the sculptured house, and that name refers to the fact that he actually created three-dimensional sculptures in clay or wood or plaster. And these sculptures became part of the construction documents for the buildings themselves. So he's working from a fine art perspective almost. He sits as an artist and creates a sculpture which then becomes the form of that building. There's a completely philosophical difference between how Deaton approached the design of these sculptural buildings and conventional architectural design. He also was interested in creating curvilinear forms. So these buildings break the mold. They're not rectilinear. They don't have right angles in them.
My father was brilliant. My father had probably about 35 patents. His patents actually were more lucrative than any of the architectural work that he had done. Some of the patents are mechanisms. He actually started very young. He invented a game called Gusher when he was a teenager and had it manufactured and patented. It's a board game, and it has all these plots of land. He had a little oil drill. Then you would end up on a certain property, and then you drill for oil. It was fun. It was like Monopoly.
He become what I've read in several different publications as being independently wealthy, based on his 30 patents that he had accomplished by that point.
My father moved here because he was anxious to start his own business. He was tired of working for other people.
Charles Deaton's design for the central bank building that was in downtown Denver, this was his first chance to show that his expressionist architecture could work.
Central Bank itself, of course, was a very conservative red sandstone building that sat squarely in the corner. But in order to update their image, in order to capture banking interest from new patrons, they wanted to express that same kind of radical newness in banking.
To be able to put his new idea of a bank building next to what was traditionally considered a bank building and have that work. And then not only that, but then to design in the drive-in aspects to it, which had those very wonderful, pedal-like covers to them for the drive-in aspects, was something that launched his career.
My father gained so much notoriety that he was invited to be on the Today Show.
One of the most discussed American architects, Mr. Deaton calls it sculptural architecture or habitable sculpture, because his design starts with a piece of tabletop sculpture rather than a blueprint, and then it's developed into a sculptured model from which the building plans are later made.
His original intention was to allow the structure to be a part of the mesa, and even though it's anchored in on the lip of this granite mesa, it really feels as if it were a wing of sorts that was ready to fly.
My father was extremely interested in aerodynamics.
He was, an engineer, an industrial designer over at Lockheed. His job there was to make aerodynamic aspects out of flat sheet metal. So that was a perfect training.
It's a fascinating looking structure. There's a shell of it here that we have that is, and this is the structure of it without, of course, the glass, the other supporting.
This represents here the original sculpture, and it was designed as a sculpture.
Looks like it might take off and fly. Is wind any problem, or that's probably pretty heavy?
Well, gravity takes care of the wind. There is the problem of vibration due to flutter, but it's sufficiently bolted to the mountain so that there's no problem there.
My father was all about freedom of soul. He started looking for land. I remember him coming up to this particular mountain, and it just moved him. When he could see the Continental Divide on one side and Kansas out on the other side, I mean, that just thrilled him. And he said, this is it. This is where I want to build.
And once he found the location and determined what the view was going to be, what the wind currents were going to be around that building, that determined how he needed to turn it and orient it.
Charles Deaton sited it exactly how he sited it because of the fact that the prevailing winds came in from the southwest. So that curvilinear art piece was also a very practical sense of making sure the prevailing winds could be deflected.
When the house was actually being built, we would come down and watch the progress. You know, they had cranes and, you know, they were lifting up all the metal superstructure to the house. So it was very exciting. And he put us to work painting all of the rust repellent on all of the metal pieces. I'll never forget that, my entire summer.
He had the steel skeleton of the shell. He had wire mesh that really was the shape. Concrete was sprayed on, but there was that final layer. And then that was put all over with white pigment and walnut shells. It was done for the texture. He didn't want it to be completely smooth. He wanted it to have somewhat of a gritty texture to it. But it was also done in a very practical reason because walnut shells, their very nature is very hard.
And the construction of the house really represented for him an act of freedom. Seeing the house from the highway is one thing, but to touch it, to experience it internally is something else altogether. I mean, there are details and aspects to it which, as you walk through, are constantly in motion. They're constantly changing. The beautiful stair that spirals down through 3 levels in the original shell. It is like a nautilus shell. It feels like you really are inside a piece of nature. It's not a house that has 4 facades, but 365 facades.
The one thing I see about this house that never gets old is that from every angle you look at it, it has a different look. And you always continue to see things just a little differently.
They call it the flying saucer, the house of tomorrow, sleeper house, clamshell house, the apple turnover house, pancake house, the house that smiles. He really said that this was a non-representational form, that this was something that just felt right for the site.
He wanted it to be designed as something that looked like it grew there, that it was part of nature. In his mind, it was like a beautiful white mushroom growing out of the peat dirt.
Deaton at one point described the house as almost a cave. And there is that feeling in parts of it, particularly that you're ensconced in this safe place, this massive structure tucked into the mountain in a very safe location.
When you look at his arches, they're not symmetrical. Every single piece of that is a different shape, a different angle.
You know, there's the cat eye window here in the bathroom. There's all kinds of little areas where you look out. Well, this wall right here curves both directions, right? And the doors in the closets are curved.
In 1973, Woody Allen made the movie Sleeper, and you know, one of the stars of that show was the sculpture house.
They actually used the idea of the elevator that my father had in the house as a
The Orgasmatron, the circular elevator, was clearly at least the inspiration for the Orgasmatron.
I could only imagine that he didn't have that fully scripted out until he came to the site and you know, saw that elevator in that space, and then I'm sure his imagination just went wild.
We never did find the orb. We looked for that extensively.
Sleeper was one of the reasons why that architecture got out to pop culture. Their choice of site, it had to be somewhere where there was this plethora of architecture, of this new architecture that they could find, and it could be easily accessible.
Key Savings and Loan and the house are very similar, of course, in terms of their geometry. Some of the materials, a lot of the detailing that went into the construction of the curtain wall, the exposed structural columns. Certainly the railing system, I think that's a real sculptural feature that exists in both the house and also at Key Savings.
You're coming down through a corridor of low rectilinear buildings, and you see this huge curvilinear form, and it stands out, it's startling. If anyone in the Front Range knows where Englewood, Colorado is, it's because they know that bank. It creates just a lyrical focal point for the city. Everyone, whether they love the building or hate it, whether they think it's beautiful or they think it's ugly, they know that building.
Key Savings, to me, always has this idea of it's enveloping the customer. It has that idea that you have these like two arms that are welcoming the customer in. And then you have, the glass front that wraps itself around the customer who comes in. When you see it from different angles all along Broadway, which you're taken aback by this building. It has a presence.
The sculptural part of the bank in Wyoming is a part of the design, whereas at Key Savings, it becomes the whole freestanding building itself.
The exterior was created as a set of concrete reinforced pedals that were cast on site and then lifted into position and formed a kind of tulip shell. Again, there's this wonderful abstraction of nature that comes into play.
They're very much individually unique handmade buildings.
It was obvious that this house was going to take a lot more money to finish it. And so he was out there really trying to get more jobs. Lamar Hunt, who was at the time the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, he approached my father and asked him to design the stadium. My father did love collaboration with a lot of the different people that would put together a project, and this was the biggest project that he had worked on.
It was an innovative design. He also designed a new roof depending on what particular sport was going to be played. Unfortunately, it was really the last design that he had that was built for it.
With the Kansas City Stadium, the engineers and architects that actually wanted to take credit for the stadium. I think it was 7 to 8 years that it was kept out of court. The lawyers it just didn't go through. And he finally, after being completely devastated financially from it, it just bled him. And so he finally just gave up on it. It was very sad. My father was extremely depressed by that. It was very depressing for him.
The design world could sometimes be a very small world, and once you cross a few lines, I think that's where he started to realize that people weren't going to give him a call back because he was fighting the system a bit.
At the end of his life, he became ill. He started having strokes. Eventually, it affected his most brilliant mind. The house stayed vacant from 1965 until we started working on it in 1999. By the end of those 35 years, the house had been vandalized, windows broken. My heart was actually broken. There wasn't really much any of us in the family could do. Bottom line, when it came to him selling it later when his health was really deteriorating, it's like none of us we couldn't save it financially.
I grew up here in the Denver area, and as a child, watched the sculptured house being built, and you would, of course, see it as you drove up I-70 to go to the mountains. It really was a literal landmark. You'd mark the way into the mountains, and then coming back down, you'd know you were almost to the plains when you could see it. Just got curious about the house, this object I'd seen from afar for so many years. And then I negotiated to buy it, and took over this project that Charles Deaton had really conceived and started before he died to expand and improve the original vision.
To his credit, John Huggins really did not want to diverge from the original vision that the house presented. And so when we restored all of the functions to the original, we also expanded that whole idea into the addition so that they would read as a single structure.
Everything that was in his original vision, we built exactly as he had planned it. What he hadn't yet provided were the finishing details. But I was able to work with his daughter, Charlie, to interpret and guess what he might have liked or done.
My father's furniture design and the influence that it had on me really helped me finish this house and actually design all of the built-ins that are in the house to finish it.
The shape, the skeletal structure of the addition, the new caretaker's apartment on the other side of the garage, all of that was exactly true to his original design as he had left it.
There were days where I was seeing it all coming together. I would have to go out on the balcony, say, and I would just shed tears. It was important to me to really please him and make him so happy.
I viewed it as a work of art that was not quite complete, but almost complete.
We're so thankful that John Huggins was really instrumental in getting the thing completed. He was a kind of curator for the house, and without him, it really would not have come about. In some ways, it's a bittersweet experience for us, for Charlie and I, to visit the house and see it in its completed form and not really be a part of it beyond that. For Charlie and I, there's a feeling that we sort of belong here.
I've been working on the National Register listing of modern buildings for quite a few years now. I prepared a National Register nomination for the building. That entailed doing the research and the analysis necessary to prove to the National Park Service that the building merited a National Register listing because of the importance of the building, its history, as well as its architectural significance.
The Sculpture House National Register status came even before the 50-year rule that most National Register buildings get because this is such an exceptional building.
Before I sold the property, I donated a facade easement to Historic Denver. So in effect, Historic Denver owns the right in perpetuity to protect the exterior of the house from any change.
Historic Denver took that on and makes sure now that the property always has its historic integrity intact.
By protecting the exterior from any change, we maintain the possibility that, 100 years from now, people will be able to, or 200 years, like in Sleeper, people will be able to, see the house as it was originally conceived.
I think Charles was able to change the face of design. It's something that had not been seen before. These structures read true. They really have a kind of context in nature, and so what is more true than that?
I think he was always searching for that new way for us to inhabit this earth.